The call came at 9:14 p.m. Han Jae-hyun was in the back of a black car on a rain-soaked street when his attorney said the name. Lim Sung-woo. 6 years. Right hand. The man whose daughter Han had put through medical school quietly without telling anyone, without wanting anything back. Just because the girl had talent and someone had to pay for it. That man had given the task force everything. Account numbers. Dates. Operational details that 7 years of government investigation had failed to uncover. The warrant was signed. The building was already being staged. His attorney's voice was careful and quiet, the way doctors speak when the diagnosis is terminal. Han had, approximately, 24 hours before the arrest became public and the window for any kind of controlled ending closed permanently. Han said nothing. He sat in the silence of that car for 4 minutes and 17 seconds while the rain beat the roof and his driver watched him in the rearview mirror and knew, from 11 years of watching this man, not to speak. Then Han Jae-hyun picked up his phone. He did not call his second attorney. He did not call Yoon Seo-jin. He did not pull up the emergency contact that existed precisely for a moment like this one. He scrolled to one name. He called it. Studies on human behavior in moments of irreversible loss show something consistent and almost universal. That high-functioning individuals facing the permanent end of everything they have built do not, in those final hours, reach for strategy. They reach for attachment. For the specific human being who, in the architecture of their interior life, represents the one thing they built that wasn't a weapon. Han Jae-hyun had built many things. An empire. A reputation. A name that made rooms go quiet and men look away. He had built all of it with extraordinary precision and at extraordinary cost, and for 12 years he had told himself the cost was worth it because there was nothing on the other side of the ledger that the empire was taking from. And then he met Naomi Reeves. And the ledger changed. Every powerful man in this city has a plan for the end. A car waiting. A contact overseas. A sequence of moves that begins the moment the walls start closing in. Han Jae-hyun had a reservation for 2 on the 42nd floor of the Jaesung Tower, where the candles were real wax and the roses were changed every 3 hours and the rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass made the whole city sound like it was trying to get inside. He was not going to waste a single second of what was left being anything other than completely, dangerously, irreversibly honest. Not tonight. Naomi Reeves walked into the restaurant at 9:47 p.m. and the first thing she noticed was that Han was already there. He was never early. In 4 months of dinners and conversations that lasted longer than either of them planned, Han Jae-hyun had arrived exactly when expected every single time. Not a minute before, not a minute after. Because punctuality was precision and precision was control and control was the only language he had ever been fully fluent in. Tonight he was standing at the window with his back to the room and his hands in his jacket pockets, looking out at the city 42 floors below like a man listening to something very far away. She stopped in the entrance. His shoulders were lower than usual. His head tilted slightly, the way it did when he was carrying something he hadn't yet decided how to put down. She stood there for 3 full seconds registering the wrongness of it. Not alarm exactly, but the specific tightening in her chest that her body performed when her brain had already understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then he turned around. And when he saw her, his face did something she had seen it do only twice before. It settled. Like a man who had been holding his breath for hours and finally decided to stop. She crossed the room toward him in the red gown and the candlelight and his eyes didn't leave her face once. "You came," he said. Quiet. Direct. Like it actually meant something. "You called," she said with the slight edge of a woman who had come immediately and was absolutely not going to say so. He pulled out her chair. She sat. He sat across from her and looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 4 months. Like she was the most interesting and inconvenient thing he had encountered in a decade, and something about the weight of it tonight made her reach up and touch her left earring without realizing she'd done it. Her mother's earring. The one she touched when she was paying very careful attention to something and didn't want whoever she was watching to know it. She noticed his wine glass was untouched. She noticed his hands resting on the tablecloth were very still. The particular stillness of a man who was managing something enormous and doing it so well that you would almost miss it. Almost. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said, but she was almost smiling. "I was going to say tired," he said. "You were not." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The thing that lived just underneath one. Outside the glass 42 floors below, the city moved through its ordinary night. Inside the candles burned. The roses held their color. And Naomi Reeves, the best investigative journalist in the city, felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise slowly, and told herself it was the air conditioning. For 1 hour it was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. Not the ending, the beauty before it. The specific, ordinary, irreplaceable beauty of two people who had found in each other a rare and disorienting match, sitting across a candlelit table while the rain ran down the glass and the city hummed 42 floors below and neither of them was anywhere else. He asked about the Cheonan investigation. She told him more than she should have, more than she told her editor, more than she'd written in her notes. The real shape of the story she was trying to tell about the port operations and the lives being moved through them like cargo. He listened the way he always listened. Entirely. No part of his attention anywhere else. No glance toward the door, no phone face up on the table. Just her, and what she was saying, and the particular quality of his focus that she had never experienced from anyone else and had been carefully not naming for 4 months. He said, "Run it anyway." She said, "My editor thinks it's too dangerous." He said, "Your editor is wrong," with the calm certainty of a man who had never once in his life been talked out of a true thing by someone with less vision, and something in her chest pulled warm and tight and inconvenient. They argued about it gently, the way they argued about everything, not to win but because the arguing was how they thought together, how they found the edges of things, how they had somehow built, in 4 months of conversations, a dynamic so specific and so mutual that Naomi occasionally caught herself in the middle of a workday thinking about something he had said and wanting to tell him how the thought had developed since. He was not supposed to be that person. She had been very deliberate about not being that person. The wine was cold. The bread was warm. He refilled her glass without being asked, the way he did small things, without announcement, without making them a gesture, just noticing and acting, as if taking care of the details of her comfort was something he had simply decided was his to do. She was watching his hands when she realized something. His glass was still untouched. In an hour of dinner, with wine poured and conversation flowing and the evening performing every surface quality of normality, Han Jae-hyun had not taken a single drink. And she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had spent her career reading what people don't say, that he was not abstaining. He was remembering. He was making sure he remembered everything. Her fork lowered slowly to her plate. The rain pressed the glass. The candles dropped another centimeter. And Naomi Reeves felt the specific chill of understanding something she did not yet have words for. She set her fork down at 10:23 p.m. The sound was small. A quiet click of silver against porcelain, barely audible beneath the rain and the low ambient warmth of the restaurant. But Han heard it. He heard everything. And when he looked up, she was already looking at him. Not the way she looked at a subject, not the careful professional attention of a woman gathering material, but directly, fully. The way she had been refusing to look at him for 4 months because this specific quality of her attention was the thing she had been protecting him from or protecting herself from, and tonight she had run out of reasons to keep it back. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Not evasion, which would have been familiar, but something closer to decision. Like a man who had spent 12 years choosing the controlled answer and was now, consciously and deliberately, choosing not to. "I will," he said. "But I need you to let me do it in my own order." The restaurant continued around them. Somewhere behind her, a couple laughed softly. A waiter moved between tables with the practiced quiet of someone trained to be invisible. The city went on outside the glass, indifferent and enormous. Naomi stared at him. Because Han Jae-hyun did not ask for things. In 4 months she had watched him operate in the specific manner of a man who established terms, who took positions, who managed the architecture of every situation he entered before anyone else had finished reading the room. He did not sit across candlelit tables and ask women to give him time. He asked her now. And she understood, with the specific intelligence of someone whose entire career had been built on understanding what people revealed when they stopped performing, that she had just done something no government prosecutor had managed in 12 years. She had not pressured him. She had not leveraged him. She had simply been present enough, known him well enough, been specific enough in her attention that he could no longer maintain the performance. Not with her. Not tonight. She had cracked him open with a question and the audacity of caring about the answer. "Okay," she said. He reached for his wine glass. Picked it up for the first time all evening. Took one slow, deliberate drink, like a man marking the end of one thing and the beginning of another. Set it down. Looked at her. I got a call this afternoon, he said. And the temperature of the entire night changed. He told her the way he told all true things, without softening, without building, without managing her reaction. The warrant. Lim Sung-woo. The 24 hours. The call he made to her at 9:14 p.m. instead of his attorney, instead of his escape contact, instead of anyone whose job it was to help him survive this. He told her all of it. Evenly. Precisely. Like a man who had decided, somewhere between receiving the call and making the reservation, that the only thing he had left to give her was the unedited truth, and that she deserved to have it whole. Naomi did not move. She sat across from him and her journalist's brain fired immediately the way it always did, categorizing, calculating, reaching automatically for the shape of the story, the angle, the implications. The task force. The buildings surrounded. The warrant signed. The source across the table who had just handed her the most significant night of her professional life on a white tablecloth between red roses and cold wine. And underneath that, simultaneous, irreconcilable, arriving without her permission. Something else entirely. Grief. Specific, unexpected, and completely inappropriate grief for a man who was not yet gone and should not have mattered this much and did. She had not prepared for this. She had been very careful not to prepare for this, had maintained the professional framing, the source relationship language, the deliberate distance, because she had understood from the first conversation that caring about Han Jae-hyun was a door she could not close once opened. She had kept her hand off the handle for 4 months. And now she was sitting inside the room. You knew, she said, voice level, each word separated precisely. When you called me. You already knew. Yes. You let me walk into a surrounded building. He looked at her steadily. I needed to see you. I needed you to have the choice of knowing, not the choice of staying away. The fury arrived clean and hot. She felt it move through her chest, her hands, the line of her jaw. Because this was the thing about Han Jae-hyun, he was never careless. Every choice was a choice. He had known, and he had called, and he had let her walk through those doors in a red dress with no idea, and he had done all of it deliberately. That wasn't your decision to make, she said. No, he said. It wasn't. I made it anyway. She gripped the edge of the table. Stared at the white cloth. Her mind was running in 3 directions at once and her heart was doing something it had no right to be doing, and the roses in the vase were very red and the candles were very warm, and Han Jae-hyun was watching her with the stillness of a man who had nothing left to hide behind and was not going to start. Outside, 42 floors down, the city had no idea. 11:31 p.m. Naomi reached into her bag. The movement was small. Han watched it. He watched everything. And his expression stayed neutral because he didn't know yet what she was reaching for. She could have been reaching for her phone. Her pen. She had reached for her pen at this table before, at other tables, in other conversations. The automatic reach of a woman who turned the world into language as automatically and continuously as breathing. He pulled out the notebook. Small. But 4 years old at the spine. Every page filled with the specific compressed shorthand that only she could read. Source names, quote fragments, story architectures, the evidence of a career built on making private truths public. It had been in her bag every single working day since she was 25 years old. It was, in every practical sense, the most reliable object in her life. She set it on the white tablecloth. She looked at it for a moment. One full, quiet moment, the way you look at something when you are deciding something about it rather than just seeing it. Then she pushed it to the edge of the table. Fully. Deliberately. All the way to the edge, past the roses, past Han's glass, past the reach of the candlelight, into the shadow where she could not take it back without choosing to stand up and cross the table and get it. She pushed it into the dark and she left it there and she did not look at it again. Han's eyes followed the notebook to the edge. Then came back to her face. Something happened in his expression. Not surprise. Han Jae-hyun was rarely surprised, had spent 12 years cultivating the specific internal architecture that made surprise an infrequent visitor. But something older than surprise. Something quieter. The expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just, in a single wordless moment, been relieved of it. Because she had just told him, not with words, nothing so simple as words, that she was not here tonight as a journalist. She was here as a person. as the specific person who had been trusted with the real shape of his life, and had decided to hold it the way it was given, privately, carefully, as something that belonged to her and not to a headline. Naomi reached across the table. Han watched her hand come toward him, and he did not move back, and he did not manage it, and he did not calculate what it meant or what it would cost or what version of himself it required him to be. She put her palm against the side of his face, fingers along his jaw, thumb near the corner of his mouth. And Han Jae-hyun, the most feared name in 3 syndicate operational files, the man who had made commissioners look away and prosecutors build careers on trying to reach him, closed his eyes, fully, like a man who had been awake for a very long time and had finally decided it was safe to rest. 11:58 p.m. Naomi saw them first. Through the rain-hammered glass, the shapes were barely visible, dark figures in tactical gear moving into the building's perimeter with the unhurried precision of a team that had been planning this for years and was no longer in any hurry at all. The faintest pulse of red and blue light had begun strobing through the water on the glass, painting everything inside in slow, alternating color. The roses went briefly red, then blue, then red again. She went very still. Han read her stillness the way he read everything, immediately, completely, and turned to look over his shoulder. He took in the scene below. He turned back. His expression did not change, because this was not a surprise. This was the ending he had chosen, walked toward deliberately from the moment he sat in the back of a black car at 9:14 p.m. and made the only decision that felt true. He was never running. There was no car waiting, no contact overseas, no sequence of moves prepared for this exact moment. He had looked at what remained of his 24 hours, and he had chosen to spend every one of them here, and the cost of that choice was walking in through this door. He had already paid it. Hours ago, when he made the reservation. Detective Marcus Webb came through the restaurant doors at 11:59 p.m. He looked older than he did in the photographs Naomi had pulled when she first started digging. Older and tireder and more complicated, the way people look when they've spent 7 years of their life on one thing and are now standing inside the moment they were built for and finding it smaller than the years that led to it. He stopped when he saw Naomi. Something moved across his face. A calculation, a professional complication, a question he would have to answer in a report tomorrow. Then he looked at Han. Han looked back. 7 years between them, compressed into 15 seconds of silence. No speech. No performance. Just 2 men who had been circling each other across a decade of distance, finally in the same room, both of them knowing exactly how this ended. "Mr. Han," Marcus said. Quietly. Han Jae-hyun stood. He straightened his jacket. One smooth, unhurried gesture. The last act of a man who was going to leave this room the same way he had entered every room for 12 years, without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching him come apart. He looked at Naomi. For seconds that held everything, 12 years of walls built and 4 months of walls coming down and 1 night of nothing but the truth and what he would say if he had another hour and who he would have been if he had made different choices at 22 years old in a different city in a different life. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small folded piece of paper on the white tablecloth, between the roses. In the light of the last burning candle. He turned around. He put his hands behind his back without being asked. He walked out between 2 officers and his footsteps were even and his spine was straight and he did not look back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he had already said everything and some exits had to be clean. The door closed. The restaurant was empty. The candles burned. Naomi sat at the table for 40 minutes after the last officer left. She didn't cry immediately. She was not a woman who cried immediately, but somewhere around minute 30 quietly without making a sound she did. Not for the story. Not for the arrest. For the specific irreplaceable fact of 4 seconds of eye contact and a man who straightened his jacket before he walked away because he was not going to let her last image of him be anything other than himself at his fullest. The Cheonan Syndicate fell 9 months later. The documentation moved through careful, untraceable channels into the hands of a prosecutor who was already building the case and needed exactly this to finish it. Kwon Do-sik was arrested during a routine port inspection in Incheon. 16 people in transit were recovered. The operation, 11 years, 3 international ports, human lives processed like inventory while the city looked away, came apart across 4 countries in the space of 6 weeks. The story ran. It won awards. It changed policy. Naomi's editor called it the most important piece of investigative journalism the outlet had published in 15 years. The byline read only, Naomi Reeves. No sources named. No restaurant mentioned. No candles, no roses, no folded piece of paper. No 42 floors above a rain-soaked city where a man put his hands behind his back without being asked because he had already decided that the only ending worth having was one he chose himself. Han Jae-hyun was convicted on 11 counts. 14 years. He did not contest a single charge. When given the opportunity to address the court, he said, "I have nothing to add." Naomi watched the sentencing from her office with the door closed and her hand over her mouth. Afterward, she sat at her desk for a long time. She opened her notebook to a blank page. She had done this 7 times in 9 months. Each time her pen had hovered over the page. The full story right there, the most important story she would ever possess, the intimate one, the real one, the one that would make everything else she'd written look like a rehearsal. Each time she closed the notebook. This time she understood why. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Her name on the envelope in handwriting she recognized. Precise, spare, no movement wasted. She opened it at her kitchen table with coffee she hadn't touched yet. It was not long. It said 3 things. That he did not regret the choice. That she was worth every minute of the 24 hours. That he hoped she had kept the notebook at the edge of the table. She folded it carefully. She placed it with the other piece of paper, the one he had left between the roses, the 4 words she had never shown anyone and would not show anyone ever, and she put them both in the inside pocket of the red evening bag. Against her ribs, where she could feel them when she needed to. Research on transformative human encounters shows something consistent and strange. That the relationships which permanently alter a person's architecture are not always the longest ones. They are the ones in which a person was completely known. Fully, honestly, at maximum stakes with nothing left to protect. The ones where someone looked at the whole of you and didn't look away. Han Jae-hyun had looked at Naomi Reeves for 4 seconds before he walked out of that room. And she had looked back. All the way back. No notebook. No distance. No story. Just her. And that, not the award, not the byline, not the case that changed policy, was the thing she would carry longest. The knowledge that she was worth a man's last free night. That she was the call that mattered. That somewhere between red roses and cold wine and rain on the glass of the 42nd floor, something completely real had happened. And she had been present for it. Not watching. Not writing. Just there.